and welcome to Zero Fox Given episode 4. I'm Alex.
I'm Jordi again. The sex change worked.
The sex change worked. You're now not... Was it Susan last night? I can't even remember.
It was Pete last time, but it was the female kind of Pete.
The female kind of Pete.
Oh, yes.
I don't
Pete
even know.
everyone wants to know, but no one does.
Like the Peter from the Narnia films, where like he just screams in a fairly like... I don't even know how to describe it. I wouldn't call it girls, because that's an insult to girls. But like, just screams in a way that's so... almost inhuman. It's kind of funny. Anyway, we've already massively digressed. We're 5 seconds in, we've massively digressed this episode.
Actually, we're 32.
Oh, I know.
I'm sorry.
This episode, we're going to be talking about murder mysteries as a genre, particularly in video games. Emphasizing the role of serial killers or just the mystery element, and what makes a good murder mystery game, or just a mystery game in general. What are the things to avoid? What kind of pitfalls have recent games fallen into? Jordi, I believe you have a game you'd like to talk about.
I do. It is called The Vanishing of Ethan.
I have never heard about this game.
Really? You did not hear about it 5 seconds ago in the edit that you will never hear.
Tell me about it.
It's actually it's Super Mario 2, basically. No.
Wait, I'm having a psychic vision. Is it a paranormal murder mystery game?
No.
Oh, okay, cool.
No, it's Grand Theft Auto Remastered. Oh man, we edited out our joke about Skyrim.
Don't worry, we'll get around to Skyrim at some point in the future. Anyway,
it's fine, try and guess what it was in the comments.
This game. Tell me about this game, Jordi.
This boy called Ethan, he releases a spirit out of wherever it was being held captive. They always seem to be very vague about that in games. The spirit is held captive, but they don't really say where. This boy releases a spirit, it's called the Sleeper, and it basically possesses people. It uses them as a vessel to channel itself to do whatever funky stuff it wants to do, basically.
So like a kind of classic demonic possession sort of thing.
Yeah, very much. And I believe that's all you start out with, and you play a detective. He has the ability to essentially visualize a crime, so you look at aspects of a crime.
Oh, so he has that kind of like very standard, we'll get onto this when we talk more about the mechanics of these games, but like that kind of very standard detective vision that's sort of become a thing
Yeah,
now.
the very cliche thing that you see in a film when a detective looks at a crime scene and for some reason can then be seen, can then basically witness the crime happening from what he's seeing in the crime scene.
It's like psychic reconstruction-esque kind of thing.
Yeah, very much.
Oh, right, so it's more like kind of like flashback sequence kind of thing, almost like what's that film called with Tom Cruise?
I don't know.
Minority Report. Yeah, more like that kind of Minority Report, literal rebuilding of a crime scene rather than some like Arkham City Batman kind of detective vision kind of thing.
Kind of. It's a little bit of both on that one.
Oh, did they do the kind of like items highlighted thing?
Yeah, so you select an item, or you select a certain area where you know something went down.
Yeah.
And from that you rebuild what you do. You select the chronological order of what happened, what you think, and then you can piece together the events, and then you get to actually watch what your character assumes happened, which is quite good, and you use that to obviously solve clues. Completely open world, free. You can walk around wherever you want. You can go right to the end of the game, I believe, straight away if you knew how it was going to play out without actually following the story.
Yeah.
And I quite like the free open world aspect. That I think is quite important in murder mysteries.
Okay.
Giving you freedom to explore yourself, and it states itself, it does not hold your hand. So
what kind of like murder mystery is it? Is it kind of is it a thriller, or is it more kind of just like kind of paint by numbers detective kind of Sherlock Holmesy style, like this happens and this happens and this happens, like almost chaptered?
Almost chaptered. It's almost it's focused more on the puzzle solving element of it as well. There's, from what I can remember, there's little or no combat at all.
Okay.
So it makes up for that with chilling storylines and puzzles that you got solved to go to the when you have that moment when the penny drops and you figure out yourself. A lot of players who have played it review that they were actually sat playing the game with a little scrapbook next to them, so they would write out their thoughts on something.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you essentially just get to play detective as closely as you can.
How did the plot proceed? Was it like, what was the resolution?
The resolution was, I can't actually remember because I didn't want to skip to the ending, because I basically saw the reviews and now I want to buy it and play it for myself. So I'm not going to spoil the ending for you here because I don't know it.
Well, it's weird because it's very similar. It sounds very similar to one of the games I was going to talk about, which is again a very similar paranormal investigation thing. It was called Soul Suspect, and it is a terrible. I'm sorry for anyone who likes that. For anyone who likes that game, but you're wrong. It's.
The whole purpose of this is to talk about games we like.
Yeah, I know, but it's talking about games and how they should be made. But like, it's a painfully average game. Not because it's bad anyway, but just because there's clearly very little effort was put into it. It was a very like B shelf, kind of like, oh, we'll just put this off in our sort of, in one of the months that doesn't matter kind of catalog game. But the premise is like you're an Irish descended detective in Salem, Massachusetts, and you are murdered by a serial killer who's been going around called the Bell Killer, who has been murdering young women. And your ghost comes back, and you then have to investigate your own murder and find out who the Bell Killer is from beyond the grave, all while the Bell Killer is sort of carrying on their shtick and like murdering people. And spoiler alert, it's as you'd guess from it being set in Salem and it being a supernatural thing, it's a lot to do with like witchcraft and like the Bell Killer's targeting potential witches, and Ronan has just got in the way because he was an investigating detective. But then it turns out the Bell Killer is actually like multiple people, because it's actually like a ghost that's possessing people to carry out the murders.
So basically, it's a storyline where every time the developer looked at it and thought, I think they might be getting bored here. Plot twist!
Well, yeah, but the plot twists are very obvious, and they're very like, there's like a kind of red herring, cliche, thuggy corrupt police officer who then turns out to have a heart of gold and wasn't actually behind anything, and just it's. I like the premise, because that whole idea of solving your own murder thing is very, if done well, would be a very clever gaming, or just in general, a storytelling device. The problem is with that is that the second your character's already dead, there are very little in the way of stakes.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing really.
What are you going to do? Kill me? Oh.
Yeah, and Soul Suspect rather clumsily try to get around. I call it like the Superman conundrum, because it's like the problem with having a Superman game. He's too powerful for you to ever really die. So what are the stakes? But like the way they solve the Superman conundrum is to have like demons in areas that can like eat your soul, and that kills you again.
Kill you again?
Yeah, it's very like, I think a better way of doing it would have just been like make you care about another character and then put them in who's alive and put them in imminent harm's way unless you solve stuff.
So you have to make it so you have to direct someone in the right way and direct them out of harm's way.
Yeah.
In the process of
Which
it.
they do. I mean, you think they're going to go down that route, because again, the first part of the game is you're trying to find one of these witches who's in danger, and the witch is apparently just anyone who's vaguely psychic and see ghosts is apparently a witch.
Okay.
And that's how they can talk to you. But then the game sort of rapidly shifts away from that and decides the character doesn't really matter very much. It's very bad.
The character's a bit cold.
Yeah.
I'm going to investigate these murders, but if they actually die,
yeah, literally.
We've got spares.
No, it's not even that the character gives a shit, but you as a player don't, because the character doesn't seem to have any reason to give a shit. He's like, this woman I've ever met is in mortal danger, but I've just found out that dying doesn't really do much to change you. So also he gets to keep his cool, like, he's dressed like in the most naff, like the makers of the game clearly were like, how do we make a detective look cool? We'll put him in a pinstripe waistcoat with a little trilby hat with a feather in it. Like, in the way that no police detective actually bloody
give him a
dresses.
Tommy gun as well, do they?
Yeah.
Go full on.
Oh, it's very annoying. Anyway, that kind of element of murder mystery games is something that kind of crops up. It's become its own kind of subgenre, and it's handled fairly poorly, I think.
Well, you could argue that the premise of it isn't fantastic for a murder mystery, because with paranormal, it kind of instantly removes your realism element to it, so you can't relate to the character that well, especially in your case, because we're alive, or at least on the outside. So with the paranormal, it's harder to relate. And one thing about a really good detective story is it sucks you in. You're actually thinking yourself, attempting to piece together the puzzle and solve the clues. It's a bit difficult when you're completely disengaged with the character, you're disengaged with any other character around them as well. You couldn't really care. You kind of want to let the characters die to see what happens. Yeah, which kind of brings us to the point of, like, how do you make... Like, what is the formula, really, for making a good... let's forget murder mystery, but although that is obviously, like... Because that's a subgenre of just mystery games in general. Like, how do you make a good mystery game? Does it have to be linear? Does it have to be open world? Does it have to have, particular elements to make it convincing? Like, what do you have to do to make a good... murder mystery game? Because I've got my own thoughts on this, but I'd be intrigued to hear what you think. High stakes, definitely, for the first one, to make you at least care, to make you want to solve it the proper way that they want you to follow the game.
Okay.
You'd need to raise the stakes up to something where you are actually interested.
Yeah.
I'd definitely say open world. For me, the big lapse in immersion when you've got a level break or anything like that would be a bit too much to take you out of the story. If you had a huge open world thing and your hand, no one was holding your hand, you were just able to walk around and find the clues you wanted. Would you not
fall into the trap, though, of a lot of these kind of wannabe open world games, like Sleeping Dogs, which was otherwise fantastic, or GTA 4 or anything like that, where you have an open world, There's not a lot to do in it other than the main story, so it kind of feels immensely superfluous and boring.
Well, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there was another game where you were a detective and it was open world, but at the same time you had to go about your daily schedule. It was almost like a survival mode. You had to remember to eat, you had to drink.
L.A. Noire?
L.A. could have done it as well. I think it was a smaller game that incorporated this system. You had to maintain your car, you had to do all things like that, so...
Because I have to say, I'm not sure I agree with you on the open world thing. I think it can be. I think it doesn't matter. Well, I don't think it matters either way. It's not necessary to have a good murder mystery for it to be either open world or on rails. I think it's just they tend to work better on rails as long as it's not too obviously on rails. Purely because you want to be continuously driven through the story, like with a murder. So this is I think the thing with murder. You know how in a previous podcast we discussed. How there used to be a very clear divide between games that had to be plot driven and games that were obviously just about the experience, not the plot. And now we're in this sort of muddled middle ground where games try and do both averagely rather than do one very well.
Yeah.
I think if any genre has suffered from this the most, I think it might be the mystery genre, purely because it's a genre that very, very obviously depends on having a compelling story. And if you try and half-arse it with gameplay elements or try and half-arse the story, it loses all draw. Like, you can have the worst gaming mechanics in the world, but if the story is compelling, people will still love that game if it's a mystery game.
Yeah, go back to some of the old PS1 games.
Well, yeah.
Things like that had so much charm because the story was good to make up for the appalling graphics.
Yeah, I think what developers need to do is sort of the same thing. You remember when Arkham City came out, or Arkham Asylum rather, and we had the Batman fighting mechanics, and now every game has just stolen, like ripped off wholesale those fighting mechanics. With good reason, which is that they were very, very well designed. I think we need to have that kind of situation where, like, there are a lot of gameplay elements to some of these murder mystery games or mystery games in general, which are fantastic, that need to be taken up by other developers and just
set as almost like an industry standard. Of
yeah, like
what you need
not
to have.
stolen, but just replicated. Like, I mean, talking about the things like facial recognition from like L.A. Noire, you know, like learning to read people's faces for tells if they're lying.
Yeah. When it's done right.
When you don't have the uncanny valley experience. I feel like Ubisoft better stay away from that one. We have enough experience of them making faces disappear entirely.
This man's face turned upside down. That tells you he's lying.
Yeah, this man has lost his entire face and is now only eyeballs.
Well, at least he's telling the truth.
He's an honest dude.
Well, if a guy like that came up to you, you'd suspect him? I wouldn't.
Well, the faceless man.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just give him a bank card and run away, but...
I recommend a good plastic surgeon.
Pinkerton?
Oh, God. Yeah, but, like, things like that. I think the other thing... Because, again, there's the problem we have with a lot of mystery games where, like, you're clearly, as a player, focused on the mystery. You don't really care... Well, you do care about the world. A good game does make you care about the world, but you don't really care about the end stakes too much, unless it's a very compelling story reason to do so, like Heavy Rain, which I'll get onto in a second. But it's more to do with the ride, and I feel like... Actually, a game that was otherwise not too great, but had a lovely concept behind it, that tried something along this line, was the recent Sherlock Holmes game. Not The Devil's Daughter, the one that came out just before then, I think in 2013 or 2012.
Yeah, I believe that's on offer at the moment.
Yeah, which it's worth picking up.
Yesterday.
If you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, it is worth picking up. It's not a fantastic game, but it's a perfectly good game. But the way they got around it was that you could make mistaken conclusions. You could send the wrong person to prison. You could send the wrong guy potentially to his death, or something like that. You could fuck it up, and like even if it didn't affect your character.
It affected the world. Yeah,
if you're a player and you have any sense of morality, which I'd like to think video game players do. And,
you're talking to the man who shot dog meat in the face.
Yeah, well, you know you're a monster, you sadist. I'll never forgive you for that. But like, yeah, short of having some kind of way of killing off your main character, I feel like that is the best way of doing it.
Adding in some sort of like butterfly effect features, like Until Dawn tried to do, but didn't really do that.
Yeah, like have the possibility that your incorrect decisions could come back and create a very negative ending to everything.
Your mistaken conclusion kills someone, and that person would have been crucial to actually helping you find the correct killer. Yeah, things like that. Semi-scripted, so you can choose which one you go to, and then it sets in motion a path of events. Things like that.
I think the key thing here, and something I know we bang on about in every podcast, because A, it's important, it seems to be forgotten, and B, we are a storytelling kind of like examination rather storytelling, which is that this mystery genre needs to have a great script and a great plot to drive the game, and if you lose any of that, the game becomes terrible. Again, it's weird in that it's the only genre really where gaming mechanics matter less than the actual plot. Because plenty of games can have terrible plots but still be enjoyable experiences, even if they're not great games. But like the murder mystery, you can have the best gaming mechanics in the world, but if the story's not there, you'll just find it boring.
Yeah, because, well, you're not running around killing 90 people a minute with an automatic shotgun or anything
Unless
like
you're Max
that.
Payne.
Well, yeah.
Max Payne is the sole exception to this
But
rule.
he's an
Like,
exception.
yeah, he's like, I could solve the mystery, or I could dive through a window in bullet time and like shoot out 28 people high off their faces on, what the fuck is that drug called? Valkyrie. Something like that, yeah. Whilst monologuing in a... Actually, I don't know, did Max Payne start this thing of like, you know, that kind of very stereotyped Sin City-esque kind of like colour palette and like detectives in the rain in fedoras like looking through glass windows and being like, it was the night of September the 10th and I had just finished drinking my 12th bottle of tequila. Like that kind of...
I went to buy shotgun cartridges.
Yeah, I was on my way
tennis.
to the corner shop to buy the Magnum rounds, hard drink and cocaine. I knew I'd somehow would
That I
get me
know
through
that
the
I'm
next
going
night.
to need in the next game.
Yeah, literally, like the hard-boiled PI thing. I don't know if Max Payne's the guy who started that off in games. Obviously, it existed in movies for much longer.
He certainly added the comedic value.
Yeah, he's certainly like, no, like, you leave Max alone. He's fine. I like Max. Before we ruined him with terrible Hawaiian shirts and baldness, he was actually a very cool character.
Oh, we know someone like that.
Yeah, we do know someone like that. Yeah, so I mean, the comparison again, which I wanted to make was Heavy Rain, which is obviously from the same guy who made, well, depending on if you're an American or in England, it's either called Fahrenheit or it's called something really annoying that I can never remember the name of. But I think Fahrenheit's the one that most people know it as, which is really, really trippy. He also did that game which is like Beyond A Tale of Two Souls, which is like the Ellen Page, Willem Dafoe kind of supernatural drama again. Like the mystery drama is sort of his thing. David Cage, that's the guy who's I'm thinking of. But Heavy Rain is the only example I think he's done that's been very good. And the premise is very simple, which is there's a serial killer who's targeting small boys, taunts the fathers, and kills the children using rain, as in like he just lets them drown.
If I remember rightly, he waits until there's a big storm or something like that and puts them somewhere where he knows will flood.
Yeah, it's almost like Saw, but just with a particular water focus. And like he leaves his clues as like origami kind of figurines for people to find and things like that. And he's called the Origami Killer, which, you know, as a serial killer name is pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah.
It also has one of the most hilariously misjudged uses of recycling recordings, where, you know, the recycled dialogue recordings, where rather than having the guy shout the name of his missing... the main character loses one of his two children in a crowded shopping mall, and rather than get the actor to re-record the guy shouting his son's name in different ways, they got to do it in like two ways, and then you just press a button, and so he just wanders around. No, it's not Sean, it's Jason. He just wanders around the shopping mall going, Jason!
Sean glitch is better.
Jason! Like, and it almost sounds like the Gary thing from Fallout, like, ha ha ha, Gary!
Jason!
Yeah, literally. And it's hilarious. And then Jason gets hit by a car, and this guy wins the award for worst.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, this guy wins the award for worst out of the year, by the way. He lets one son get hit by a car, and the other get kidnapped by a murderer. So he's not paying too close attention to what the hell's going on. But yeah, it was a very cleverly plot-driven game. Like, the plot was spectacularly good. The twist is, depending on who you ask, either very predictable or very good. I actually thought it was both. You could see, if you were paying attention, you could see it coming. But it was very cleverly done. Spoilers for those who don't want to know what the twist is. Jump ahead another 2 minutes.
Let's talk about it specifically in 2 minutes, just to taunt them.
So the main killer is actually a guy called Shelby, who you play as in parts in a first-person perspective as one of the detectives on the case of the Origami Killer. And it's when you're in those first-person perspectives, it's done in a way that never lets you know that he's actually the murderer. So again, it's cheating a little bit on that, but it's still very cleverly done, in my opinion. There's no supernatural element to it. It's just a very simple, tightly focused.
More grounded.
Yeah, the aesthetic's very important as well. And here's the other thing I think is particularly true about mystery games and murder mysteries as well. The aesthetic is almost as important as the plot. It's not as important, but it is almost as important. It doesn't have to be great graphics, but you need to have a very unique look to it for it to stick out from the other mystery games, which, you know,
Which it does. From the small clips that I've seen of it, it does seem...
It really does mimic that Seven vibe of just having a very rain-washed city and everything's grey and gloomy and dim and almost like, you know, it's iconic in the same way that the kind of 1890s London by Gaslight was sort of iconic, where everything was sort of orange hues. It's this kind of thing, that everything's washed out greys and blues and just and earth tones, and it's quite grim. It is very Seven. It's the closest thing to Seven in a video game that you'll find, I think, and it's
coming out 2019. Seven, the video game.
Yeah, and like Seven, it's what makes it great is the fact that they just keep the plot quite simple. There isn't a lot of like, oh, but then it was this guy with this thing all along. It was Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick. You know, there's none of that. It was all very, everything made sense. Like they never went in a plot direction that you looked at and thought like, that didn't see that coming. That came out of nowhere. What the hell was that?
This guy got murdered in the subway. Let's go to the trampoline park and see what we can find.
Yeah, exactly. there are mystery games that sort of, again, horror games do this as well, and horror films do this as well. There's leaps in storytelling because they just want to move things along, and it infuriates the hell out of anyone with half a brain who's watching or playing it.
Yeah, anyone playing along and following it then gets a sudden jump to something where they're talking about something completely different, going in a completely different direction for no reason. And it's infuriating because you kind of think, what's this for? Why?
It's a very tricky thing, I think, these games, purely because like not only is it a story driven, not necessarily I think a story driven experience, but it's a very particular kind of story experience where the character development has to be spot on. You have to keep it tight and hard focused and not deviate, but like at the same time you've got to build up a convincing, without exposition jumps and without cliches, you've got to build up characters in a way that you do actually care what happens to them within the context of the mystery, because otherwise there are no stakes.
You need someone to go through the development process of the game and actually play it from the player's perspective and understand what they would think most gamers would be feeling at that time and tailor it to that.
Yeah, I mean, like,
just a little bit more focus and attention.
Because I mean the comparison, you might disagree with me on this one because I think you quite like the game, but Until Dawn.
Yeah, I only like the game because it's got Brett Dalton in it.
Okay, well,
that's the only reason. I don't like the game as an actual concept. Well, as a concept I do. I don't like it as its finished product.
I like the concept insofar as, like, obviously it was trying to be like a playable movie with different endings, which is fine. Like, that's cool, even though there wasn't a lot of gameplay other than press square now. My annoyance with it was more to do with terrible voice acting and terrible plot elements.
Say anything about Brett.
Dude, his voice sounds like grated cheese.
Shoot you in the face.
Leave him alone. I don't know. I haven't come across a decent murder mystery game in a while, I'll be honest, other than Heavy Rain, which came out, I mean, quite a while ago now, 2011, 2010, something like
2011.
Yeah, I mean, there have been... The best mystery games, I think, in recent history have been either indie games or very, very, very clearly, like, not murder mysteries insofar as they're more focused on a kind of generalised mystery, like Life is Strange. It came out 2-3 years ago now. I think they've just brought out, as of the end of last year, a prequel called Life is Strange Before the Storm. Again, spoiler alerts for anyone who hasn't played Life is Strange or Life is Strange Before the Storm. We will be talking about plot-relevant details, so if you don't want to have that spoiled for you...
We'll catch you in the next podcast.
We'll catch you in the next podcast, because we might be talking about this for a while. So yeah, Life is Strange is a game that started off its life as a kind of teen drama with a little bit of superpowers thrown in, that you play as a girl called Max, who's just moved back to the town of Arcadia Bay, where she's been away from for 5 years, and she kind of dropped out of contact with all her old friends. She's very hipster, like she's a photography student, and she's very like, I think she's 16, 17, just very... Like,
that kind of person.
20th century hipster cool, if that makes sense. But like, she's a very likable character in a lot of ways. That is a very fully rounded character, that she's got flaws as well, and you find yourself disagreeing with past decisions she's made, even as you're making decisions for her. But yeah, she comes back, and through a series of wacky things, she finds out she's developed these time manipulating abilities where she can rewind time and do things again, prevent things from happening. And part of the game is finding out that there are unintended butterfly effect consequences of doing this. One of which is that her best friend, who she sort of fell out of contact with, has now rekindled her relationship with Chloe, who is my pick for the coolest character in the video game under the age of 20 for quite a while. He ends up in a wheelchair because she like goes back in time to change a decision that she made, and the decision ends up with Chloe being in the car with her dad when they had an accident, and leaving her paralysed from the waist down.
So is it a one-time only thing for the going back in
No,
time?
no,
Can you not keep
you
going
can
back
go back
as much
and
as you
yeah,
please?
so you can go back and undo the fix you made, for example. And
Oh,
like,
what,
by-
so she just doesn't care that her friend's in a wheelchair. Just,
No, no,
you can suffer.
well, no, she cares. And then she's like, "Oh crap, I've made a mistake," and then goes back, but and changes it so she's out of the wheelchair again. But the result of that is that Chloe then loses her dad, because her dad dies, because the dad was in the car accident without Chloe there, and that subtle change meant that he died rather than that he escaped relatively unharmed and she was crippled. For example. By the end of the game, it all kind of catches up with her because like it all kind of goes under control, and a giant tornado hits Arcadia Bay, and like it's very trippy.
I just wanted to go back and do my homework better.
Lots of dead whales on the beach. It's very strange. Anyway, underneath
Gulf of Mexico.
yeah, underneath this is the sort of bigger mystery of there's a missing girl called Rachel, who was Chloe's best friend, and depending on how you play the prequel game Before the Storm, possibly her girlfriend as well. Rachel was the sort of free-spirited, likable top kid everyone thought had a perfect life, but was actually quite a troubled, fell out into a bad crowd kind of thing. And she went missing about 6 months before the start of the game, and part of the game is finding out what happened to Rachel and trying to fix everyone's lives again. And it turns out that she was killed by Rachel is dead. She was killed and buried by the photography teacher at the school called Mr. Jefferson, who's a kind of like weird, creepy, sadomasochistic.
Exactly what you'd expect from someone with the last name Jefferson.
He's like a creepy sadomasochistic kind of predator. Really disgusting, sort of slimy dude. And like, there's nothing. What's interesting in the game that has this kind of supernatural element to it is like, there's nothing supernatural about him. There's nothing particularly like grand about him. He's not like some
He's
kind of
just an awful person.
yeah. He's not even like a kind of grandiose Hannibal Lecter style serial killer you have to stop. Like Rachel's the only girl he's ever murdered. Otherwise, he just does very sleazy behavior. But it's just that he's such in a realistic way, an unlikable, disgusting character. And for a vast majority of the game, you don't know this about him. He's the teacher that Max looks up to because he's like an award-winning photographer, and she's a photography student. And you know,
Is there a link there?
well, yeah, this revelation is really, really hideous, and like it's done very well. And a lot of it is the relationship drama, and that's really the point I'm making here. Is the game's mystery matters to you because it's not the sole focus of the character. Like, or even if it is, it's even during the episodes where it is, it's done in a way that is very clearly structured in a good narrative. Like they clearly had worked it out before they released it. And again, what's interesting is that because it was released episodically, a bit like Telltale games, the way characters played it affected the ultimate outcome that the game developers created.
So
like,
they would look at game number one and say, "Oh, most people chose this choice.
Yeah, so
this choice is effectively canon.
Yeah.
So
Well,
the second
it was
game
released,
is based off of this.
It was released episodically, so like depending on how you played it, there were different things, and you could see how many other players made the choices you made. So you'd be like, did you go back and stop Chloe from being paralyzed, and save her dad's life but leave her paralyzed, or did you leave her unparalyzed and keep her dad dead? And like 51% chose this, or 33% chose that.
Those with daddy issues chose this option.
Yeah, exactly. And like it made the whole thing matter a lot more. I suppose the slighter issue is like, and they kind of dodged it by doing a prequel game as a sequel. But if you were to do a sequel, I think the kind of problem with that is that the majority of players who chose a particular path will obviously get that as the canon ending.
But the ones who didn't
will get angry because their canon ending isn't canon and they have to go from a different. Well, not sure angry, but
I suppose the way you get around that is by making two different playstyles of the same game. But
that's a lot of work and effort. Game. I think they're not going to bother with that.
No.
I'm just based off other games that have tried similar things, like the Infamous series or whatever. They tend to go with the canon ending. It's just what the majority
to
of players
appease the most amount of people.
Yeah, exactly, and also just to stop the kerfuffle from sort of going on. But again, what's interesting is the way Life is Strange, because you're talking about open world. Life is Strange isn't open world, but it's very clearly done in a way that makes it feel open world.
So whatever level or instance you find yourself in, you're free to move around. You're free to go where you want.
Yeah,
within
talk to whoever you want, that kind of thing. And it's interesting that was so well done that actually that was the thing that most players grabbed onto, with the result that when they got to Before the Storm, they sort of dropped the supernatural element of it entirely and just focused on the mystery and the relationship dramas and stuff like that. And
did you say this was an indie game?
It started off as an indie game. It's now because it sold so well. It's now effectively a mainstream game, but it was very out of nowhere. There are missteps. There are some very big missteps, not plot wise, but just in terms of like pacing and developer choices. So, for example, in Before the Storm, which obviously is a prequel, so most people know most people who have played Life is Strange will know what Rachel's ultimate fate is, which is to be horribly murdered. And then Before the Storm, she's a main character because you play as Chloe from Before the Storm, not Max, and you play through the whole thing and you get to know Rachel and you get to know her story and you really like her or dislike her, or, you form your own opinion of her essentially. But whatever happens, like, she's important to Chloe and therefore important to you. And so you sort of put to the back of your mind her ultimate fate, and the game
catches you off guard again.
Well, no, because it doesn't catch you off guard. What the game does is it ends up like a happy montage of like Chloe and Rachel like in photo booths and hanging out and being friends or girlfriends or however you played the game. And then they cut. It's so jarring. It's so out of nowhere. Because screen fades to black. You're putting down the controller. You're like, oh, yeah, that was nice. I've got that good finished game feeling. I go put on a cup of tea or a bath, and then suddenly they cut to a cutscene of just Rachel's phone on a table in a bunker that you know what the bunker is if you've played the first game, with like Chloe desperately calling the phone, and you can see there's like 17 missed calls, and off to the side, just out of camera, you can hear camera flashes and camera noises, and you're like, ooh. It's so misjudged. Like, it's not. I don't know what they were going for, the developers. It's very misjudged and tonally, in that like you've just had this happy ending. You know what Rachel's fate is. You don't need to be like. You don't need it shoved in your face so gratuitously.
The only way that would have worked was if that was setting up for a next game or something like that.
But the thing is, you know already.
That's what I'm saying. You know it's Rachel. You know it's from the previous game, so it's just it's essentially giving you a really good ride, leaving you on a happy ending, and thinking, you know what, let's bring you back down.
Yeah, it's really disgusting.
Time to come back to reality.
As a scene, it's really disgusting, and not in the good way of like, say, The Seven as a film, where like a lot of the scenes are pretty grim,
gory, disgusting. It is that makes you feel wrong.
Well, not even disgusting in the way like you can see very uncomfortable scenes and still be in awe of them as storytelling. But this doesn't serve any storytelling purpose. It's just there to make you feel ill. Well, I don't know why. I don't even know why it's there, but like that's how I felt. I just felt a little insulted actually by just how disgusting it was to have it thrown in my face. And I'm not a sensitive snowflake who really gets offended by this kind of crap. It's just very tonally a very jarring and poorly thought out beat to that story.
I might wait until the end of this podcast and then watch it. To see what's upsetting you so much.
Oh, it's.
Somewhere. I'll wait until you're.
I think because the thing is like you don't see anything awful. It's just the implication.
You know what's going on.
I think you won't see what's offensive about it unless you've played the first game. And and you've built up a relationship with these characters, because like you come to really care about Rachel, even just in the first game where she's more of a plot device than she is in the second game, where she's the main character. But like it's I don't know, it's just poorly thought.
It ruined your day, didn't it?
It did ruin my day.
It really did.
No, it ruined my hour. Then I went back to playing Battlefront and I felt better.
Oh, you get over things quickly.
Apart from dog meat, you monster. I'm never forgiving you for that.
One thing that triggers you.
He's a dog. You leave the dog alone.
I only shot him the one time when you were watching.
But yeah, I think the thing to take away from things like Life is Strange and Heavy Rain, and I think you mentioned before we started this, Before the Rapture, which we'll talk about in a second.
Everybody's gone to the Rapture.
Everybody's gone to the Rapture. There is the storytelling and the characters are by far the most important thing in these games, and they're things that have been sorely neglected a lot because big budget game makers don't tend to view it as terribly important anymore.
Well, yeah, that's why you kind of look to indie games for a relief of all that things, because you don't want something from a big corporation with dollar signs in their eyes who are just going to make the biggest bucks they can.
Yeah.
You want something where someone's created a project that they really care about and they've really invested parts of themselves into.
Because I don't know much about Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I know the premise of the game, but I don't know much about it. I know it's an indie game as well, but...
It's very much... It's not like a full game. I think it's only about 5 hours long, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Battlefront 2 was only 3 hours long, so...
Yeah, but microtransactions, you can make it 3.5 hours.
And $300,000. Yeah.
Fair deal. It's quite an odd one. It's set in a small English village, which is very odd, because everyone's got English accents, which you don't really hear much in games like that. The voice acting is really good as well. And it's just everyone is disappearing, turning into these balls of light, essentially. And you're walking around, you basically just appear and you don't really know what's going on, which I think is quite good for a detective thing as well. If the game really drops the player in, it starts out the game when you yourself have no idea of what's going on. It makes you want to figure out more as well. If you are like an omniscient player, so you already know exactly what's going on, all the things that go on, but you know the character doesn't, so the whole purpose of the game is to make the character find out, just so you have peace of mind that you led the character to it, and it makes it a bit bland and it can get a bit boring. But
Is it
when
open world or is it?
It's open world, yeah.
Okay.
The only problem they've got with it is it's open world, but your character walks everywhere. And they do not walk quickly. They are not a quick walking person. It's
Just get a golf buggy. makes
I
the game
wish.
a bit
That
less.
should be the DLC.
Yeah, it makes the game a bit less dramatic. It's like everyone's gone to the rapture. What's going on?
Joyride.
I will find out in my trusty like heaven mobile.
Hydraulic suspension V8 engine.
Just like around, storming through this English village in a Bugatti Veyron. Just like
One car, man. Why? Why that?
it's a horrible car.
Taste.
Just like it's some kind of like kit car, some model kit car like the Aerial
Oh, the
Atom.
KTM.
The Aerial Atom, just on the Vampire land speed record car. Something massive
go
out
for
of
that.
place.
I'd go for that.
Richard Hammond wouldn't.
Well, he would. He just wouldn't last.
Maybe he went to the rapture.
Well, he was a fiery orange ball of light.
God. I'll tell you what.
Let's move on before we get sued.
Yeah, weirdly, we're going to like we had this disagreement about whether or not they should be open world or not. Weirdly, I think the playing style and maybe the developer that would be ideally placed to make a game like this that hasn't is Naughty Dog's way they did Uncharted games.
Yeah, those were. You had potential to do something a bit more with those, as opposed to just guy who goes around looking for lost treasure.
I mean,
and
like
plays a level of a Crash.
they're linear
game.
experiences, but like they are done in a way that feels very like expansive and open, and you don't really feel constrained at any point. I don't think.
I know. I remember the first time I played one of those. I think it was Uncharted 2: Among Thieves.
Yeah.
It was the first one I played, and I remember thinking, "Oh, it's level based. It'll be kind of meh." But then when you actually get into the levels, the amount of freedom you have to run around and find what you can find is really good.
Yeah. Also, like they are just very good at Naughty Dog are very good in general at just crafting good stories.
A heartbreaking tale
Heartbreaking romance. Yeah.
between Crash and Coco.
No, between Crash and Cortez.
No, it's Crash and Tanya. Is it Tanya?
I don't even know.
The other Bandicoot, the one that they had to cut because basically in the 90s trailer or something like that, they gave the Bandicoot like giant boobs. And then they thought, hang on a minute, these are animals, we'll probably get into shit.
Yeah, maybe. just maybe.
Just maybe.
But then beach volleyball's games out there, so
Yeah,
anything's possible.
anything is.
Like
Apart from with Xenomorphs.
Like the amazing Hideo Kojima excuse for why Quiet is basically naked in Metal Gear. It's like she breathes through her skin. That's why she's basically naked. She wore clothes, she'd suffocate. That's my reason. I'm sticking to it.
Yes, Mr. Director Man, why have you got your hand down your trousers still?
Oh God. But yeah, that linear experience I think would be good. Yeah, the level based design for an Uncharted game and the way they tell a story, and also the way, because again, like an Uncharted game is a puzzle game essentially, which at core I suppose most mystery games are. It's puzzle solving. It's done in a way that I think would lend itself quite well with a bit more graphics and a slower pace to the game, to the kind of classic detective Sherlock Holmes kind of, even something that's sort of True Detective as a video game. A very sort of procedural thing where the enjoyment is like the plot twists, the focus on human despicability and the kind of character dialogue.
Slow pace, but emphasis on so many different features. So if you're interrogating someone, it doesn't matter if that interrogation actually takes 10 minutes of game time, which you would argue in a kind of bland game, that's quite a long time just to have a conversation between two characters. But if during that period of time you're looking for visual cues, speech cues, anything like that, it can become entertaining if you're essentially trying to solve a puzzle just with a conversation with a person. Yeah,
like I think the slow burn video game is for a murder mystery in particular is very good, or just mysteries in general. Actually, for something like The Rapture, you don't want it spoiled quickly.
Well, yeah, because with that whole genre, it needs a good standpoint to jump off from. So to do that, you need to lay the foundation of a good story, and then have the high intensity at the end when you've established all of the characters, all of the stakes, and things like that.
I suppose the one thing that sort of separates the murder mystery from the mystery, though, is that a mystery game can sort of stand not on its own 2 feet in so much as it can stand sort of separate from having any antagonist. You don't necessarily need an element of threat to drive it along. Whereas I think with a murder mystery, I don't know, you might disagree here. I feel like you need some kind of compelling villain or compelling threat to be up against the clock on.
Yeah, you need to have, with a murder mystery, something like that. The more you solve the clues and get closer to the killer, the more the killer starts hunting you. So the more you have to watch your back.
Yeah, or kind of like not a 20 literal 24-hour style clock where different screens like dun 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 dun, but like just
beep.
but just where you have the ticking clock of threat, basically, where you've got a certain amount of time to do something.
Yeah, well, that increases the intensity and the anxiety in a game as well. Even when you look at Amnesia or something like that, where you had to hide in the dark to hide from a monster, but at the same time, if you spent time in the dark, your sanity would go down.
Yeah, that was a great plot device as well. Was I was thinking the main character like walks to a bath and like drains the water and sees like her own dead body and like her sanity meter goes down or whatever it is.
Yeah, massively.
And the more she goes insane, the more she starts seeing weird crap everywhere.
In fact, sanity, Amnesia is probably the only time, to go off topic quickly, that's probably the only time I've seen an effective sanity device deployed. And that could be something that would work really well, because if you're in a murder mystery type thing, there's a lot of gruesome things, there's a lot of deaths and things like that. The sanity of the detective, that could affect your performance, how you solve the puzzles, what they lead to.
Yeah, whether or not certain clues are highlighted or not,
Exactly.
Things like that.
That actually just came off the top of my head now during this. It's quite a useful tool to have in a mystery game.
I suppose the question is, how do you make a compelling... Like, what makes a villain compelling in a murder mystery? Because obviously, like... I talked a little bit about how the villain in Sole Suspect was just a very sort of cliche paint by numbers, like almost like a 5-year-old's idea of what a murder mystery villain should be. Like very like he wears a hood, he has a weirdly vague but cool, edgy sounding serial killer moniker.
Yeah.
He has a particular method of murder that's incredibly convoluted and yet somehow historically relevant.
Ooh, danger.
Yeah, the murderer glanced briefly at a history textbook
and it died.
And recreated something really obscure.
I think charisma from the main villain would be a main thing to draw you to them.
I mean, I suppose that only works in the case of villains like Vaas from Far Cry 3, who's obviously like an incredibly charismatic villain, or even Pagan Mint from Far Cry 4, actually.
I mean, when you've got a murderer in a story, it's very easy to get bored of that quickly, because yes, he's a murderer. What's he do? Shock horror. He murders people.
But in a lot of games, a lot of mysteries, you don't see the murderer. Like, you don't have first-hand experience of running into the murderer or having conversations with the murderer. He's almost like a looming threat, but he's not on. He's off screen.
Yeah.
And in that case, making him charismatic is very very, very difficult, I think.
Well, they could be charismatic in actions left behind. Like in quite a lot of mystery murder serial killer games, the serial killer has their own calling card or their own signature. Like with Heavy Rain, they have the origami, things like that.
Like taunting clues, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Okay, things like notes left at a crime scene, things like that. You can still add in charisma without actually seeing the villain.
Death traps, things. Yeah, no, okay, that's fair enough.
They could also increase the suspense as well. If they add certain things in around crime scenes and things like that make you think, I'm not 100% sure that the killer isn't still here. Things like that increase, your levels of anxiety.
As long as we don't get a kind of Freddy Krueger style or like a Jason Voorhees style, like they'll never die. They always come back.
Oh dear.
It's always another one.
Was he a character on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Didn't you get stabbed through the chest with like a giant alien spear? Yeah, I got better.
Yeah.
You're gonna elaborate?
I mean, to be fair to them, they did at least make an entire season explaining it.
Yeah, that's like,
they did the decent
thing.
But
not for another season. Like the first season was like, how are you alive?
No, it was the first season.
Oh, was it the first season?
It was the first season. There's about 3 episodes of everyone being like, how are you alive? And then they're like, well, maybe we should write a plot line to them.
Yeah, they're like, how are you alive? Just reasons.
You always expect Coulson to turn around and say, don't worry, there's a story arc coming in episode 4
that
will tell you.
I dated the scriptwriter in college, that's why I'm alive.
You couldn't have let him go, he's too good.
He's good. He doesn't really have... He's technically still dead within the films. It's weird, like, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is part of the film universe, but he's dead in the films and not dead in the series.
Well, I mean, he's probably alive in this... We're very off topic here, but he's probably alive in the films now after Winter Soldier, because all of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s secrets are accessible and online, so they'll know about Tahiti and all bringing him back. So everyone will know he's alive, it's just no one cares.
Yeah, Tony Stark has apparently gotten over it quite quickly.
Yeah, he was so close. His first name is Agent.
But yeah, with the compelling villain thing, I think there's 2 very different ideas of compelling. I think both work. And I think they both run the risk of being made... Well, no, one runs the risk of being made a cliche, and one runs the risk of being made boring. And one is that kind of highly aestheticized kind of glamour serial killer, like the Hannibal Lecter, basically, like, some kind of like genius, like almost Moriarty-esque kind of super complex, always vaguely artistic, kind of like
plot master, basically thinks about every single crime.
The chess master, if you want to put a TV trope on it, like the kind of like Lex Luthor psychopath who like you're trying to undo. And there's, they always have like a particularly aesthetic. We were talking about that with the bell curve cliche, but like, they have some kind of like cool moniker, and they'll have a particular method of murder that has personal meaning or historical significance or whatever. Like there's a purpose to their killings. They don't just kill out of compulsion because they're assholes. And then the other side of that is you get the Mr. Jeffersons of Life is Strange, where like the villain is very is compelling because of how real they are. Like, there's nothing grand about them. They're just awful human beings. Like that very true detective thing of there's no, you might hint at the supernatural, it might seem for a while like there's some kind of grand thing, but the end reveal is they're just really awful people.
Almost like, I mean, I know the films themselves have let themselves down, but in Saw, I think the foundation for the character Jigsaw is actually quite strong. It's just a man who has been told he's going to die, gets into an accident where he should have died, and still didn't die, and was just genuinely curious about how much the human body could take.
Well, he didn't get an accident, he had cancer.
Well, he had cancer, but he was also in a car accident as well, and he was impaled on some
Basically, he went through
piece of metal shrapnel. Basically, he went through quite a bit.
I mean, it's a lie. We all know that his real start was, when he got those two guys and invading his house and made death traps for them like a psychopathic little child.
I mean, to be fair, Jigsaw is a more preferable character than the kid in Home Alone. Anyway,
they're the same character. I'm convinced they used the same MO right down to the voice recorder. Even the voice even sounds the same on the voice recorder. Anyway,
well, that kid can throw his voice.
Yeah, literally. And then I don't know. Yeah, the Jigsaw killer. I think he started off very well in that kind of like Hannibal Lecter kind of like
the curiosity. That's quite another one. Just you've tortured these people, you've killed them in such gory ways. Why? Just I wanted to see what would happen.
Well, no, it's because he wants to teach them about the value of life or some nonsense.
It's a bit of both. In later films, it starts to arc to people don't appreciate their lives and they think it'll be handed to them. In the first film, it was very much I want to see how much a human can go through and still survive.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that falls more into the Hannibal Lecter kind of like. Compelling villain, like some kind of like almost something faintly mythical about the killers, whereas like I said, the other way you can go is have the very ordinary killers where if you run the risk of making them bland.
Just I kill people because I want to.
Yeah, like it becomes almost step by numbers. Like, oh, we caught this guy. He's not very great, I guess, but there's nothing particular. Like it's a bit like in GTA, the kind of thing GTA parodies mostly with characters like Trevor, where like
Hi, I'm Trevor. Jumps off a bridge.
Yeah, like just you flash back from like you're playing as Franklin and you flash back to Trevor and he's like pushing some guy off a bridge, going, "My daddy was not nice to me," and you're like, it's very unconsciously a send up of that kind of like psychopath. I don't like. Yeah, like another separation might be like the kind of Norman Bates, American Psycho, Dexter's of this world versus versus like the kind of killers you find in True Detective or the kind of killers you find in the kind of killers of the week you got in Hannibal, where like they were trying to be the kind of grandiose killers that Hannibal was, but were more actually just sort of incredibly psychologically screwed up people with no real plan.
Well, that's kind of been overdone as well with so many things. That was probably great when it started. But now it's too much of a, as you say, cliche point where, he's got this grand motive. He wants to create art with murder and things like that.
That's the problem.
Unless there's a really strong motive, unless there's a very clear, very strong reason why they're doing things in a certain way, it tends to fall apart nowadays.
I almost disagree insofar as like I don't like they need to have a clear reason, but I disagree that it has to be like a sane. I think we live in a cynical age. I think we've lost the idea that villains need to have some kind of grand plan. I think we're now accepting the fact that sometimes people are just awful because there's something wrong with them. Like their minds are broken in some way or structured in a way, or they're just traumatized or just, they were born in such a way that was made them awful human beings to begin with and beyond redemption. Like it's a weird comparison, but like almost like Kilgrave in the Jessica Jones TV series, before they get into his backstory and before you get all the kind of sub-story stuff, the initial period before you really meet him, where he's leaving these really creepy photos out for Jessica to find. She's having some flashbacks to his voice, being like telling her to do stuff, or like he'll just say or leave her something that's just incredibly just nasty. Like there's nothing grandiose or like or organized about it. It's just there to make her feel scared. Like it's just him being a dick. And I think like that kind of killer, weirdly, is one I'd rather see in a video game. Like I'd rather have a murder mystery game where you're chasing a guy whose only reason for killing is like he enjoys killing.
I think that's where the description kind of gets a bit wavy as well, because thriller and horror kind of go quite toe and toe together in most aspects. I think that's where they kind of go off. A thriller would have your very grand psycho who's doing things in a very weird way for a reason or to get attention or something like that, whereas a thriller is just a horror is just a cold-blooded killer who just wants to hurt people or make them feel awful. I think that's where the boundaries kind of separated between the two genres.
Yeah, I think another problem that's A, caused the cliches to become cliches in the first place, and B, has caused the kind of death of good storytelling in these games. Is that dumbing down that happens a lot now? Where this isn't unique to video games. This happens in TV. It happens in films. I know we have a fairly privileged position of like, you know, sorry viewers for us bragging here, but like we're fairly intelligent people, objectively speaking.
But I think rocks taste good.
Well, I think rocks taste delicious. Yeah. But like, you know, but you and I. So I mean, for example, like when I watched BBC Sherlock, which I otherwise the first 3 seasons I enjoyed quite a lot before it jumped the shark.
Yeah.
But like the first season in particular, the very first episode, I remember working before, and I hadn't read the book at this point, so I didn't know the plot twists in advance. I remember working out who the murderer was going to be in literally the first minute of the thing, like literally the first minute, and you should never be in a situation where you as a viewer work something out before a character like Sherlock Holmes or before a character like Poirot or something like that.
Yeah, they're supposed to, you know, in contrast to the video game almost, they're supposed to be holding your hand and directing you through the thing. They're supposed to be thinking of the things that you don't think to look
in a video game, you want to be made to feel intelligent. You want to be made to feel like you've worked out the mystery, which means that you need to work it out and the detective needs to work it out at the same time. If they're ahead of you or if you're ahead of them,
it's awful.
Yeah, because if they're ahead of you, you feel lost and confused. If you're ahead of them,
you feel bored.
You feel bored because you're like, why haven't you caught up? It's really obvious you're a moron. And that's one of the really difficult things to balance. And part of the problem here is like because we got to this thing where game developers now are terrified of being too cerebral, or TV as well as being terrified of being thought of as too cerebral. That they just dumb it down to a point where anyone gets it. And again, like I said, because if you're playing a detective, that annoys the hell out of you. And the only way to rescue that is to try and blag your way through the game with other stuff, like make the plot make no sense, so you can't guess it, or make the gameplay
cheap way.
kind of like glossy overpaint so you don't notice it. Yeah, you're right. It's cheap. It's. I feel like we need to get back to the idea that it's okay for these games to be clever.
We need to get back to thinking.
Well, that's true of the human race in general.
Well, yeah. But to narrow it down to a point, we need to get back to video games that actually make you think. It's not a crime to have to use your brain to solve a video game.
Yeah. And like one of the things, like we mentioned detective vision as one of the gameplay elements. I'm sick to death of detective vision. Like in a Batman context, or if you want to use it as spider sense, as I think they're doing for the new Spider-Man game, that makes sense, and I'm fine with it there. It's good there. I like it there. Where it's not okay is in things like the Sherlock Holmes games, where like they just go, Sherlock's deductive skill means he can somehow like
do it for you.
Yeah, have a psychic aura around an object, and you go, I will go click on that, and I will see what the clue is, and then I will walk away.
I mean, what makes you think like you've had more fun in a game where it just displays it for you on screen like that, or a game where you've actually got scraps of paper where you've written down your own theories?
Insulting to the player. Like if you're the detective and the person's like, yes, the victim was murdered in this room.
There's a blood patch, but we're going to highlight the blood patch just so you know to go and have a look at it.
No, not even that, but like, you know, it's an enclosed environment. It's not like a football field. They're like, okay, this is a room. Someone was murdered, or like something happened in here. They shouldn't need to highlight objects. You as a person should just be like, okay, what's in the room?
This chair's been kicked over. Maybe there was someone next to it.
There's a scrape mark on the floor here. This window is broken here. There's a bullet hole in the wall here. You know,
there's blood there.
What's the angle of the gunshot? What's the temperature of the room? You know, things like that. And I mean, like, think about it. Try and think of it in another way. Like, if you were reading a mystery book, like a locked room mystery, and the book kept on going like, yes, Detective so-and-so was in the room. The doorknob looks like it's worth a look. You know,
all in italics, on its own separate line.
Just you would quickly give up on that book, and the only reason we haven't quickly given up on the games, well, actually, have we clearly given up on the games, and is that a problem going forward? Because now I feel again, you may disagree with me. I feel like the audience now isn't there for a big budget mystery game, because and for a very cerebral game, because I just don't think. I think if it was ever there in the first place, I mean, bear in mind, it is a niche storytelling thing in its own right. It's not like you're never going to attract the numbers that like an FPS is going to attract. Were the numbers ever there in the first place? And if they were, are they there now that they've been made dumber games where you can go back to that and still make money? Or are you destined to, if you sink a lot of money into these games, to lose your money? And if that's the case, maybe is it worth doing that anyway?
I don't think the audience is there right now. If you're just going to follow on the trend of making these style of games, then obviously the money won't be there for you, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think the money is still there if you put in an investment and take a bit of a risk and write something that's different, that's new.
Yeah.
I think there is still an audience there because we're just two people talking about it, but I can guarantee there's so many other people out there who are sick to death of detective games for the exact same reasons.
Yeah.
I think if something came out and it was so clearly identified as different for all the right reasons, I think the audience is still there to be pulled back. I think they're almost in purgatory at the moment. They haven't completely dismissed it, but at the same time, they're not so enchanted with it they're going to buy every game.
I don't know. I feel like I'm slightly more cynical on this. I think it is. I think it's rescuable, if that's a word. I think that the developer that does it is going to have to take a financial hit to do so. I think there's inevitably going to be to sink the kind of money into this game that you'd need to make
investment
to make it worthwhile and to really resurrect the genre. I feel like you need to sink so much money into it that you're not going to get it all back. You need to be prepared to take the financial hit. I think it's the kind of thing that a large developer should do, aiming for awards and critical praise rather than
just bank success.
Rather than bank success, at least initially. Because if you can do that, then you can get the bank success later.
Yeah, you don't need to if you don't make it all back in a year, but it gets all of those awards, all of those reviews in 5 years' time, you will have made it.
Yeah.
Especially with now, graphics are good enough now that no one's really going to bat an eyelid if your graphics are 3 or 4 years out of date, because they're still good. They're still strong. It's not like a quantum leap between PS1, PS2 and all that.
Also,
you can still
now
have great graphics.
Particularly when people like still making the transition from PS4 and Xbox One to Xbox One X and PS4 Pro.
Yeah, PS4 Pro barely has any difference anyway, so it's only on a 4K TV, and even then only half the games do it. So.
Yeah, and even if you can afford a 4K TV, and that's like 60 inches.
Exactly, so no one's going to want to go and buy, unless you're loaded with money, no one's going to want to go and buy a new TV just to suit their new PS4. You may as well get a regular PS4.
Yeah, so I think now that we've gone through the terrible truths about these games, I'd like to talk about what you and I would like to see plot-wise, or even gameplay-wise in a video game.
I'm curious to see what, because we didn't mention this when we agreed to talk about it, we didn't mention what sort of period this was going to be set in. Were you thinking of a modern? Because the first thing that came to my mind, I thought of something more old-styled.
I don't know, I was thinking more like 90s style. I
was thinking 1800s kind of, almost.
You should play, if they ever release a release date for it, there's a game coming out called Vampire, which is... it's sort of a spiritual successor to Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines, I guess. Which, by the way, if you haven't played, viewers, you should definitely go and play. It's quite old now, so it's will be quite cheap. But like, it should be on Steam or early access, or not early access. What I'm talking about, Xbox Live and so on. Oh, sorry, excuse me. And it's set in the Victorian times, and you're a doctor who's also a vampire, and you investigate crimes using your vampiric senses. Like it's going to annoy me with the detective vision again, but seeing in the dark and smelling blood, and it depends. If they do it well, it could be very good. Because at least there's a legitimate reason for them to have those skills in that regard.
Yeah, there's a base point. It's not just he's magic. He's really good.
But they did a first release of some gameplay, and I think a trailer went out, and it looks great. It looks great. Obviously, I'm going to reserve judgment until I can actually play some of it. But
it does sound good. I'd give it a look. When I was thinking of an 1800 style detective and murder mystery thing, I was thinking of a very bare bones, grounded type thing where you are literally just a person. You're not the main character. You're not you don't suffer from Fallout kind of syndrome where you walk into any faction, do one question, oh, you're our leader, you're our god. You are just a guy doing his job in the world.
You know why I should imagine Dogmeat as Elder of the Brotherhood now.
Do a better job than Maxon.
Yeah, just Dogmeat sitting on that deck and turning around being like, I've got another mission for you.
Bang.
Can you imagine Dogmeat, I found another settlement, needs help.
Yeah, this is why I shot Dogmeat, so he can't do that.
But you left Preston alive. Anyway.
Yeah, but me and Preston have got...
So you're talking about something in the vein of... Have you seen... I haven't seen, I really want to see. You and I should see it together, actually. Is a... Go on a date with me.
Oh, honey.
Oh, honey.
That's the most subtle way to ask someone out.
Bill, yeah, it's online on a
Spend
podcast.
4 podcasts working your way up.
You can't turn me down now.
Oh.
Without upsetting our viewers, our 7 viewers.
Our 7 subscribers.
One of whom is probably your girlfriend.
One's my girlfriend, one's my friend, one's our editor, one's me, one's... No, not you, because you had the chance. There's 3 subscribers who aren't us. We're doing well.
Yeah, so there's a film that came out called Limehouse Golem, which was sort of like... a horrible murder. They went on in, East London in the same period as Jack the Ripper, but before Jack the Ripper, and it's Bill Nye investigating a fairly gruesome set of serial killings that they're not Jack the Ripper-esque, but they are. There's almost like a pre-origin of that.
Well, actually, thinking of detective games, one that would be really quite good would be a kind of Craze era-esque time, or in fact, no, just in the Craze era, being the detective assigned to the Craze case.
Yeah.
That'd be really good because it's
Although I suppose the problem is you already know how the plot's going to end in that case.
yeah, that's the only issue. It's sort of like a
Like LA Noire,
night manager-esque type thing as well, where it's that person all along, but
you're just trying to bring them down.
they're in the public eye, they're a celebrity, they're a philanthropist, they're known as being really good.
That's actually quite a good idea, actually. Like that kind of night manager, McMafia style.
Someone you know is
thriller
guilty, but you have to prove it to the world, not just your character because your character's stupid, which we always get.
I suppose that's also how you get around.
Interesting.
That's also how you get around the whole never knowing more than your character thing. If you and the character know everything from the beginning, and that's not the point. The point is trying to tell other people that it's
exactly. And you have to build up your own portfolio of evidence. You have to build up cases and things like that, and then you also have to
avoid corrupt colleagues and.
Well, yeah, that'd be brilliant. You'd also have to present the cases to the right people and risk the butterfly effect type thing of presenting it to the wrong person and compromising your investigation,
or getting your girlfriend or your boyfriend in danger or whatever. Yeah, no,
exactly.
That would be.
That'd be quite interesting.
That's a really good idea, actually.
That could suit any timeline, probably more modern one, I'd say, from Craig's time up to present day.
Not gonna lie, I'm now jealous of your idea. I think it's better than mine. But that would be good. I don't know what I'd like to say. I don't know. I think that would work really well either in a very modern setting, like ultra modern, in the same way the Night Manager was, or if you want to do, I don't know, what's like a late 1930s, 40s. Actually, no, it's a bit too late, maybe. Maybe early 1900s or late 1880s kind of like setting would be good.
Yeah, that kind of dark atmosphere where not much is great in the world anyway.
If I was going to do my history game, there's two ideas I had. One was to have almost like that kind of Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare style, that you're set in a theatre of war behind enemy lines and you're undercover and you need to build up almost like a Cold War drama. But as a game, so Bridge of Spies or some kind of World War II infiltration game where it's not action heavy, but it's just about never blowing your cover, never saying the wrong thing, never doing the wrong thing, trying to find a particular person or carry out particular missions whilst remaining with your cover intact and undercover, having to cross over borders without getting caught, stuff like that.
You say trying to recruit people behind enemy lines as well,
being careful
about
who you tell, or trying to break people out of POW camps without being discovered, things like that.
That's quite cool. I'd like the aspect of that as well. If it was, I'd like a wartime aspect one like that. That'd be quite good.
I think it'd be quite fun to set that in. Obviously, you'd forego selling the game in Russia to do this, but setting it in Soviet era, Stalin's Russia, or maybe when death of Stalin, that kind of awful, very unstable power vacuum that happened in the immediate aftermath, where your character's been undercover in Russia successfully, and now this upheaval's going on, and it's a nightmare, and you're trying to carry out your missions, and eventually the plot is you just need to get out. You need to get out before you're discovered.
That would be good.
Almost like what's the thing with Tom Hardy called? Child 47 or something like that. The film he did about the series of child murders in Russia, where he played a Russian commissar in Soviet Russia. Which I think interesting fact about Russia, which that film picks up on, which is that until the events of that film, which I've dramatised, they're fictional, but there was a similar thing that happened in real life. There was a point where Stalin literally said there were no literally made it explicit, there are no murders in the Soviet Union. They do not exist. Murder is a capitalist disease. It doesn't exist in communist Russia. And so anything that was actually a murder, the Russian police had to pass it off as either the murder victims or the murderers were capitalist spies, or that they were mad or diseased or something. That was the only way. They weren't allowed to call it murder. It was really weird.
Be quite good. I'm just thinking now if we had a game like that.
Yeah, even being a detective in that kind of way, let alone being a spy and being undercover, but even being a detective in a world where murders aren't allowed to happen, you have to run it past superiors in a certain way, or risk being thrown off the case, or even being politically made a political opponent and liquidated.
Well, he killed her, but when he did, her jacket came off and fell in the river. So technically, he's a thief.
Yeah, something like that.
That reminds me, if you were an undercover agent in Soviet Russia, that just reminds me of the Clint Eastwood film Firefox, when he goes and steals a plane that isn't budget rip-off SR-71, I swear. That'd be quite an interesting mission as well. Nick a plane, fly halfway across the world and don't get caught.
I'll tell you what bit of technology will really help with this genre of game, actually, when we've ironed out the kinks in 5 years or so, is VR.
VR would be.
To replace Detective Vision, not even as a continuous experience, but let's say you have the ability to play the game on controller, but then when you get to certain elements like searching a room for clues, you put the VR helmet on and you literally just look around the room and you pick up objects.
Even with the controllers, you can fumble around the room yourself and actually you could have an element of feel or a simulated element of feel. You could feel when something had been damaged or anything like that, or your character could.
My other idea was that it was in a more modern setting, or like a 90s onward setting, which was, I'm going to be honest, it's not my idea. It's something I remember reading about 3 years ago or 4 years ago as a film concept that never happened, where someone wrote an article saying that there was an idea going forward to do a Peter Pan thing, where like it was a very loose adaptation of Peter Pan, where like Sean Bean and Aaron Eckhart were going to play Captain Herc and Smee, but Captain was going to be a captain in like the NYPD or something, and Smee was his partner, and they were investigating a series of murders of young women who were the Wendy's for the serial killer who was called Pan, and Pan was going to be like a serial killer preying on young girls.
Wow.
A very sort of like, almost like Jarvis Tetch in Batman, kind of like Mad Hatter looking for his Alice kind of thing. Like again, like Alice in Wonderland's another one that's been done to death on this because it's very easy to make that into a kind of pseudo like serial killer kind of vibe. But Peter Pan, I think, would be a good one, and like Peter Pan as a character anyway is a fairly psychologically weird character. Like that, a very childlike mentality would be quite creepy in a serial killer, I think.
Yeah, that's something that hasn't been really. It's been done. It hasn't been done well, I don't think.
Yeah.
The childish nature and things like that. Not like a Lenny. We just want to pet the rabbits, George.
That's the mystery. Trying to find
Mice and Men, the killer.
You're trying to find out who killed the rabbits. That's the plot of the game.
But no, I think there's a good idea. I would like a wartime kind of behind enemy lines spying.
But yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I didn't think of the Soviet era detective. That would be really quite good. Would you, if you were thinking of a detective in Soviet Russia, would you think of actually being a Russian detective or still a spy behind enemy lines?
Well, it could work either way. I think both would be good. And also, I think what would be nice about that is like it's very. We talk about having to have a strong aesthetic in these kind of games. Soviet Russia has a very particular aesthetic of very functional, concrete, kind of like utilitarian era structures, interspersed depending what city you're in by like the older, more czarist kind of like grandiose ones. So like if you're in Moscow, which would be an ideal setting for an 1960s, 50s, 70s Soviet Russian detective game. You've got all this functional grimness and the poverty of the average person surrounded by the opulence of state official houses and the kind of hypocritical champagne parties and the Kremlin and the Orthodox cathedral and just all that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's quite good. Another one we haven't really think of. What about somewhere in Japan? Be quite interesting.
I think the problem with Japan as a setting for a murder mystery is that
Well,
sudden hurricane started outside.
no, don't worry. Our location is blowing down. It's fine, viewers.
We're actually in a magical house, like the house from Up, with balloons everywhere.
It's so magical. If there's a murderer in here, it's fine. Everything will glow. We'll know what to look for.
Didn't we already make the joke that I murdered like some fish and stapled them to the roof in like the very
Oh yeah.
first podcast?
Yeah, he's still up there.
He's still up there. The guy from Animal Rights is still there.
Yeah, he's dripping.
Starting to smell a bit now.
Yeah, he's starting to leak.
That's the true murder mystery. This is we're the murderers.
The true mystery is when are they actually going to come here and catch us?
Yeah, the murderers all along. I'm actually I'm not even real. Jordi's the murderer. I'm just like the Norman Bates' mother voice in his head, being like, "Why he wouldn't even have to fly."
Nah, your voice isn't as deep as my mother's.
Yeah, it's a bit awful when your mum's got a deeper voice than you, isn't it, Jordi?
Yeah, I know. Even worse when a 5-year-old comes up to you and they've got bollocks bigger than yours by their voice. Just, yeah, you're right, my name's Dave.
Like your girlfriend's about 4 foot tall and has got a deeper voice than you. Let that sink in.
I mean, 4 foot tall's a bit harsh. Everyone's now going to think I'm dating a 12-year-old.
Everyone already does think you're dating a 12-year-old.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Actually,
How old are you again?
wasn't there nothing like when you guys walked into like a shop and someone thought you were her older brother or something?
Yeah, we, to go very off topic apparently, we walked in to get her work uniform and everyone thought she was a small girl going to get a school uniform and they thought I was her older brother.
Despite the fact she is actually 2 years older than you. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a sad life.
It's a sad
But someone's got to live it.
Oh yes.
I don't know, I was just getting this razor blade out.
You were talking about before the wind interrupts. It's like a particular setting for murder mysteries.
What, Japan?
Japan. Well, the thing with Japan, it's a bit like the thing with China. Unless you're going to really westernise the game and ignore cultural stuff, which I think is a mistake, the cultural implications of Japan, or like the particular way in which society functioned, particularly if you're going to periods, I think, is unless you take a great amount of time to explain how it works in the game, or you really just overlook it with your writing, which again I think is
Well-
a mistake. It's going to be difficult to reconcile to a Western.
Or it's either that, or if you play, say, an American detective who's gone over there to solve something, and then part of it is your character adapting to the change as much as you learning about the culture as well. So again, that'd take a lot of effort to do.
I mean, I think
But I think that's the way you'd pay it off. You just make your character have to adapt to it.
it's something that we are getting a Japanese detective game, that's being made into a movie. Which is the Detective Pikachu. With the
I
voice
don't think that's the idea that I had in mind.
What are you talking about?
No, don't tell me it's a Brian Blessed voiceover.
No, it's just Ryan Reynolds apparently doing Detective Pikachu.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know.
No.
I know. Like, I think
And on that bombshell,
on that box, I might go watch it. I don't know. I mean,
I'll go watch it. But
At the very least, it'll be so bad it'll be funny.
I mean, I'll go. That's one of the films that you go and watch after a night out at the pub.
Also, if Deadpool 2 doesn't reference the fact that he's now done the voice of Pikachu, I'm going to be upset.
Yeah, it's like Avengers needs to reference with a no shit Sherlock line with Benedict Cumberbatch and Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, if they can pull in what's his face, the guy who does Elementary is Sherlock, Johnny Lee Miller. Just pull in all three.
They would just meet up and look awkwardly at each other for a bit.
Yeah, and that really good young actor who played Sherlock in that film, what was it called, Art and the Blood? That would.
Yeah, who is he?
I don't know. I can't remember his name.
I don't know. I mean,
I have a feeling
I think the lead actor was kind of outshone by the wonderful directing.
The beautiful directing. I really hope he listens to this.
I really do.
Yeah, it's that joke we made about the Jack Sparrow thing of human hair from my back. No, the viewers aren't going to know what we're talking about. We should move on.
Yeah, we should move on because I'm starting to get aroused.
I think I'm glad I thought of that Soviet era thing on the spur of the moment, because my previous idea coming into this was literally just that Peter Pan thing, and because I thought
That's fine. My one was quite sparing.
yeah, because yours was really good, and I was like, oh damn, it's better than mine, and then and out of nowhere I was like, wait a second, I got one. Yeah, no, I'm really glad I thought about that idea about the Soviet Russian thing and the Russian detectives, because I was listening to you with your idea about what was it?
Oh yeah, it was such a great idea that we've forgotten already. It was the idea about what was it?
Yeah, see, I can't remember. Oh no, you're mafia style, more modern night manager kind of where you already know the mystery. It's the point is convincing other characters the mystery.
Yes,
I really like that idea. I was so glad that I had my Soviet Russia idea, because previously all I had going into this was there's that Peter Pan thing, which isn't even my idea. I read about somewhere else, that would be good. And then
thief.
Yeah, and then on the fly I was like, wait a second. It's weird as well. The reason, the thing that inspired me to think about that was that terrible game Saboteur, which was bloody terrible. It should never ever be played by human beings.
It spawned a good idea, so that's its sole purpose.
It's its sole purpose. But yeah, I think that'd be really good. Also, you could get that guy. I can never remember his name, but the guy I always just think Ken Adam when I think production designer. It's just not Ken Adam. He's been dead for a while. But the guy who does his designs for he did City 13 in Half-Life, and he did Dunwall in Dishonored, and I think Karnaka in Dishonored as well. He tends to do those kind of weird fantasy-esque kind of cityscapes designed. But having him called into the sort of mildly fictional 1980s, 1970s Soviet Russia communist style would be really cool, because he's great at that. I know, it would look pretty. I'd like that.
Just in the background as well, if you walk into a bar or something, the only thing that's on the TV screen is Rocky 4. That's
Yeah.
the only little gimmick.
Rocky, the new Rocky film, or the new Creed film.
It's got Dolph Lundgren, I know.
Yeah, his son. It's just, oh god.
I still love Dolph Lundgren though. He's a chemical engineer. You leave Rocky alone.
Never. I'll never leave Rocky alone.
It's the best.
He's a tool.
Fuck you.
He's such a tool.
Fuck off.
And also it's just Sylvester Stallone as a tool.
Don't worry, Adrian. I blocked all the punches with my face.
Why do I know sunshine and rainbows? He sounds.
Calling him punk.
The thing is, he sounds a bit like, you won't get this because you don't watch football as much, but there's a footballer called Harry Kane who I really like. He's a cool guy. He's also a great striker. He's on my team. But he sounds like he's got, I don't know, he sounds like he's got a speech impediment.
He does.
Oh, does he actually?
When he was a baby, there were complications with them removing him from his mother's lady pocket.
Her meat sock.
Her little red Corvette. Don't even try. I've got so many up my.
Oh, God.
I don't want to say up my sleeve. That just sounds wrong. But yeah, when they were trying to remove him, they accidentally severed a nerve or something like that. So he actually has lower facial paralysis.
Oh, okay.
So it's a speech But he's actually a very intelligent guy.
Yeah, he
People
is.
just think he's quite dumb
he's-
because of how he talks.
Yeah, no, I really like the guy. I'm not saying nothing bad about Harry Kane. I really like the dude. I'm just saying, like, he sounds a bit like Sylvester Stallone. Like they both kind of slur their words.
I was talking about Sylvester Stallone.
Oh, were you actually?
Yeah, it's not Harry Kane. I don't know who the fuck Harry Kane is.
Oh, right.
It's Sylvester Stallone with this.
Wait, hang on. So you said Sylvester Stallone's intelligent?
Yeah, he is. He's got an IQ of about 160.
Sylvester Stallone has a genius level IQ.
Yeah, he does. He's the same IQ level as Dolph Lundgren, and people just think he's stupid.
Yeah, but Dolph Lundgren's a chemical engineer. Sylvester Stallone's a hack.
No, he's not.
What the hell did he do?
Beautiful.
What the hell did he do before the... Oh, yeah, no. The man wrote Rocky IV. He's a bloody literary genius.
Leave Rocky 4 alone. I like
I will
it.
not
If you're
leave-
going to slate any Rocky film, start on Rocky 5, okay?
What, the robot butler?
That's Rocky 4.
I was like, yeah, well, there you go. That's why I slate Rocky IV.
You don't even know, man.
Yeah, because they're
Right?
terrible.
Fuck you.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not buying the Sylvester Stallone a secret genius thing. I'm not. It's a bit like if you turn around and, like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger once wrote a thesis on quantum physics. I'd call bullshit for that.
That's a bit more
I'm
far-fetched.
calling bullshit for this.
Fuck you. Sylvester Stallone is a genius, right?
He's a genius.
He's a genius.
He's sunshine and rainbows.
You sound like James William Bottomtooth.
But like, I love that scene where they have that and he's screaming at his son about that, the whole like life is in sunshine and rainbow speech, and the actor looks really confused.
The actor's
and I'm
just like, what's
convinced
he talking about?
I'm convinced it's not because of the plot. It's just the actor doesn't know what he's saying.
So you gotta get what you want to do, what you want to do, and be what you want to be. What?
I need to go to the vet. What did you say?
You want me to pick up your dry cleaning?
Life ain't all sun screams and Wayne blows. I'm what?
Just a bit more far-fetched. That's like a Schwarzenegger one.
Oh god, they should do another Predator movie with Schwarzenegger. He's the right age. Anyway, that's wildly off topic. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
So yeah, we've had a discussion about murder mystery games and mystery games in general. I think we've talked a little bit about the kind of mechanics that work and don't work for these games, and the story that you kind of do have to have behind them. Well, you and I had slightly different opinions on how easy it is going to be to resurrect it as a genre. I think. I remain cautiously optimistic. I don't think it's quite as bad as a Superman game, which will never have a good one. There'll never be a good one. So yeah, no, I hope I'm proven wrong. I hope there is a good murder mystery game. I can't actually think of any that are coming out in the next year,
Not.
other than Vampire.
No, not as a sole point.
No.
No. I think, like I said, the main focus would be on indie. You want an indie developer to do something quite cool, something that turns a few heads, and then someone to capitalise on that pure idea, not for the money, but for evoking a good concept from someone who's, you know, essentially just sat there programming a game for love of programming games and nothing else, and actually capitalise on a good idea instead of thinking about the money and the funds that it would bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, next week that wraps up today's podcast. Next, I keep saying next week.
Next fortnight.
Next podcast, we will be talking about one of our favourite games, which is the BioShock series. We will be talking about what the next BioShock, if there is going to be a next BioShock, but if there is, what it could be.
Where it could be.
Whether there's any kind of core aspects of the BioShock games that they all share in common, some of the weirder plot elements to it, and some of the science behind it. And we'll
What's the average IQ level of a splicer?
Yeah, we're talking a little bit about the sexual prowess of a Big Daddy. This is something the BioShock games weirdly raised for themselves.
Well, I mean, by name, the handyman's quite good.
Oh god. Well, you know, Songbird is a
Woof.
giant. Yeah, he's a great in the sack. That wraps up today's talk. But you know, we don't just want to talk endlessly. We want to hear what you think. You know, you want to tell us if we've missed any good video games about murder mysteries or mysteries that you think we should know about, or that you want us to talk about in future. Got any ideas for a good game, or any plot ideas, or gameplay ideas? Do leave them in the comments below.
We don't want to talk endlessly, said the man who created a podcast channel.
And we will talk about them next time. Until then, thanks for listening. Don't go naked in public. Don't get murdered by strange, ambiguously named creeps like the Bell Jar Killer or the Laptop Man or Guy on a Roof. Or Guillermo del Toro.
No, he just murders films.
He just murders. No, he's not. Yeah,
He murdered Crimson Peak.
He murdered Crimson Peak. And we will see you next time.
Stay safe.
Bye.